So down there, some ideas came to me and about my future, because I didn't want to go back to the conference because I knew it would not be the same. I really enjoyed the idea of doing something legislatively significant.
Right. Well, you build up all these contacts over the years through the Catholic Conference and your various jobs in state government.
Yeah.
But I mean, there were other things going on that weren't really good for the kind of mission that you were on. I mean, the abortion issue became much more prominent. The Vietnam War had, raged out of control.
And also build the church itself, after having this enormous, exciting period of Vatican II opening up to the laity, began to go this way, began to close.
Close in.
Yeah.
So you saw the windows closing.
Yeah, the window was closing for great social reform. So I invited Emil Lockwood over to have breakfast.
Now, who was Emil Lockwood?
He was Senate Majority Leader.
He was a Republican.
He was Republican. He had run, he was an ally on this issue.
On Procreate.
I had great respect for him, for his effectiveness, for his nature. And so he had run for Secretary of State, got the nomination, on the ballot in November against Dick Austin. And
in 1970, the same year Procreate was on the ballot, and the same year that Milliken and Sander Levin ran against each other. And Austin beat him for Secretary of State. So
he did.
He's out of a job. He's working as deputy director of the Department of Commerce.
And so I said to myself, Emil can be more useful than that to Governor Milliken, who was just elected. So I went to see the governor, and I said, Governor, have you given any thought to asking Emil Lockwood to be your lobbyist? I said, he's sitting over there in the Commerce Department, not using all of his talents. I said, but if you're going to get him, you should walk over and ask him yourself in his office, which he did. And Emil said, I'll do it, but I have a favor to ask. Would you consider appointing me to the next vacancy in the Public Service Commission? The governor said, yes. So a month or so later, I invite Emil. I said, Emil, I don't think the timing's right on this, but what about when our issues get over with? Because I was waiting on the Supreme Court to rule, and Emil was waiting on the governor to appoint him to the Public Service Commission. I said, if this works out, why don't we consider joining ourselves in a lobbying firm? He said, well, I'll think about it. So February goes through, March, April, May, June 28th comes. I get a phone call. The Supreme Court has rejected our appeal to the Procreate issue. Shortly thereafter, Emil calls and said, guess what? The governor has just appointed somebody else to the Public Service Commission. He says, maybe we ought to talk.
The timing is right.
The timing is right.
Right.
So he said, I'm going up to Alma to haul some hay for a secretary that needs some hay, which was typical of Emil. He was just the most common touch person you'd ever meet. And I said, yeah, great. So we went up on the way back. I mean, it's a 80-mile ride. We agreed to do it. Well, actually, I didn't. I said, well, let me think about it over the 4th. I went up to Stuart Hubbell's cottage, took our family up, which is kind of a tradition on Little Traverse Bay, spent the weekend there, came back convinced that this was a good fit, a good combination. We agreed to go into business on October 1. I informed Cardinal Dearden. We had something like 8 clients. And on October 1 when we opened. And Emil was just the most perfect person for me, because he had a master's in accounting. He was a genius. He could take a dead business and somehow put his hands on it and it would rise up like Lazarus, which he did for my father and mother's restaurant.
Really?
Yeah, when it went belly up. But
well, let me ask you this question before you get into exactly how you and Emil worked at the lobbying firm. We live in an era of term limits. People contend that there are a lot of rank amateurs in Lansing who don't know what they're doing, and it takes them years to learn the job, and then they have to leave before they can take advantage of it. And yet, Emil Lockwood, back in the 1960s, who many people regard as the greatest majority leader in recent Michigan political history, certainly in the last 40 years, only served in the Michigan Senate for 8 years. And in fact, after his first 2-year term, when senators had 2-year terms, as a freshman, he was elected minority leader, and then 2 years later, he was elected majority leader. What does that say about Emil Lockwood? What does it say about the people we're electing today under term limits, or maybe doesn't it say anything about anybody?
Well, it may, but I'm probably not the guy to answer that question.
Well, I mean, it didn't take a lot of seniority for him to thrive.
Correct.
He was a genius, as you say.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the answer. You know, certain people, if there were the certain people today, like Emil Lockwood, they would rise up and be Emil Lockwood.
That's a very good assumption. It was, because he was a genius at, and I wouldn't have suspected that with Emil. He was so precise and analytical, but boy, he was, you know, one of his strongest features was his commitment to bipartisanship. It didn't really matter what your political beliefs were. If you could help me on this issue, we could serve the state better.
Right.
And Democrats really admired Emil.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you this, because it happened in your hometown, Owasso. When Emil was running for Secretary of State, he was, I think, giving a speech at the Rotary Club. And this is one of Emil's dominant personality characteristics, his commitment to equality. He was castigated, he was criticized severely on that occasion for supporting fair housing. And he simply told that audience, if you don't support equality of opportunity for all people, don't vote for me. And he meant it. Mm-hmm. He was, I mean, I don't find that kind of commitment. Well, it was rare in either party, actually. I was going to say in the Republican Party today, but that wouldn't probably be fair. In either party. I mean, it was very deep. It was very similar to Milliken and very similar to Phil Hart. And I was been blessed, really, to be associated with those three people.
Okay, you opened this multi-client lobbying firm. Multi-client lobbying was not a widespread phenomenon at that time. There were scarcely any multi-client businesses in Lansing. Jim Karub had started one just a few months before you did. There were early pioneers like Bill Doyle and Tom Cleary who had started multi-client firms, meaning that they had more than one interest that they were representing. But you started your firm. Did you have any idea that it would become as big as it has become today? Did you have any conception of what you really were getting into?
No, we didn't. Well, we wanted to be bipartisan, and it was achieved with Emil and I, but we had no vision that the federal government under Reagan would practice what we then called devolution, or a devolving of powers from the federal government to the states, which turned many national corporations to the states to find lobbying talent. And we had such crises as consumer protection. We had environmental laws where the DNR began to seriously fine Michigan corporations for violations, pollution violations. So it became very complex, and that just made it